Sports and entertainment are unifiers of people, and the Rose Bowl Institute celebrates the power of sports to unite people everywhere. Since 1922, over 100 million fans have witnessed unforgettable moments unlike any other venue in the world. The global recognition of the Rose Bowl Stadium will bring people together to learn, be inspired, and explore discussions that positively impact society, showcasing the qualities these events have stood for over the past near century. Now, America's Stadium is the flashpoint to inspire and to educate the next generation of youth, community, and the country. This is the Rose Bowl Institute.
Hello and welcome to the Rose Bowl Institute's first in a three-part series discussing and addressing race and sports in today's society. We would like to thank all of the donors to the Rose Bowl Institute, for we wouldn't be here today without your help. My name is Brian Brantley, and I'm honored to be your host for today's discussion on race and sports. This dialogue is done in the spirit of Jackie Robinson, whose legacy continues to inspire Americans to learn, grow, and educate one another on the importance of these issues. We are grateful for the amazing panel that we have here today, as we could spend all day talking about their accomplishments and awards. First, we have Sharon Robinson, an award-winning author, an educator, an educating consultant with Major League Baseball. She's the daughter of Jackie and Rachel Robinson, and she is the vice chairman of the Jackie Robinson Foundation. Next, we have Taylor Branch, historian, who is the author and winner of the Pulitzer Prize for his book, Parting the Waters, America in the King Years, 1954 to 1963, and numerous other awards. We have Mr. Kobe Jones, one of the most iconic American and international soccer players, after a 12-year career with the LA Galaxy and also playing overseas. We also have Mr. Ronnie Lott, a national champion with the USC Trojans, a college football Hall of Famer, a four-time Super Bowl champ with the San Francisco 49ers, a pro football Hall of Famer, and a business leader. Thank you for taking the time today to talk about this very important topic.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So to get started, we'll go back before as we move forward, and we're going to start with you, Sharon. Your father was a legend not only on the field, but he was a true social justice pioneer in the world of sports. What does your father's legacy mean to you when you were growing up, and what does it mean you see his legacy continue to this day?
Well, thank you, Brian. My dad, my brothers and I were young when my dad played Major League Baseball. So my strongest memories of him are during his post-baseball career. And that was important on a number of levels. One, he was home more. And two, our dinner table conversations centered around the civil rights movement and politics primarily. As kids, we got in a few points about what was happening, but we were always focused on the larger mission. And from that, we learned that our dad both our parents were activists, and over the years, they found ways to bring get the entire family involved. So that's why I wrote Child of a Dream, a memoir of 1963. I write for children. I'd written a number of books about my dad as a baseball player and as a father and all of that. But I thought it was very important for them to understand the basis of his activism, which started long before it became a Major League Baseball player. And it goes way back to his Army days when he refused to move to the back of the bus and was court-martialed and fought through it and won. That's why I wrote this particular book. And, at 13, we went to the March on Washington as a family, and we started doing our famous jazz concerts at our home, where jazz musicians came to support the civil rights movement. And my dad was primarily a fundraiser for the civil rights movement going back before King with the NAACP.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. And Taylor, with your book and your Pulitzer Prize winning book, Parting the Waters, American and King Years, 1954 to 1963. What can you help us understand historically that were going around the national landscape during that time?
Well, but I studied it a lot, and at the time the civil rights movement was coming to its crest in the 1960s, people had already been looking to sports for social change for some time. I mean, after all, back to Jack Johnson, the heavyweight boxer at the early beginning of the 20th century, or Jesse Owens at the Olympics in 1936. Sports, because it was an artificial world that valued fairness, was adopted by people who were desperate for fairness in the real world. And so Jesse Owens was somebody around the world. Joe Louis, Dr. King always used to laugh at his meetings because he said he had a hard time squaring his love for Joe Louis with his nonviolent philosophy, because boxing is a pretty violent sport. And there was a lot of hope, but not an awful lot of thought. I mean, very few people said when Jesse Owens won in 1936 the 100-yard dash, we said that set aside or overcame Adolf Hitler's white supremacy, Aryan supremacy. But we didn't ask what would have happened if Jesse Owens had lost the 100-yard dash. We wouldn't have all turned around and said, well, that vindicates Hitler. We're going to forget racial justice. So the sports world and the real world were just beginning to interact. Jackie Robinson's break into the world of major league sports was big. I grew up in Atlanta. We didn't even have any major league sports in the South. We didn't have major league teams precisely because of segregation. And not until the 1964 Civil Rights Act did my mayor in Atlanta say that the instant segregation was outlawed, the city council of Atlanta built a sports team on land it didn't own with money it didn't have for a team it hadn't found. But within a year, it got the Milwaukee Braves to move to Atlanta and become the Atlanta Braves. So sports was all churning in this strange space between the artificial world of fairness, where Black athletes were clearly excelling, and the real world of racial hierarchy that was really hard for them to succeed in. And those interactions are, what I hope we can talk about, because the two worlds of the artificial sports and the real world of injustice have been getting closer and closer together with more justice, but it's been a long road. Jackie Robinson actually went down to Albany, Georgia in 1962 and was there during some of Dr. King's demonstrations when by state law, Black children could not even go into the public libraries, let alone restrooms and restaurants. So the world was really stratified by injustice, and race was struggling to help us show the way how to change that, both in sports and in the larger world.
Fantastic perspective. And Kobe, the challenges, did you see any challenges playing, you obviously played ultimately soccer, but you probably played some other sports. What did you see from your perspective as a kid growing up playing sports for you and these challenges that were out there?
Well, well, first off, thanks for having me. But I definitely saw challenges as a young kid. I mean, I grew up in a suburban community outside of Los Angeles, so it was a majority white community, and you recognize as a young child that you're different than most everybody else. So without a doubt, you are affected by that and everything that comes with it. You have a different view of the world than most everyone else that you are interacting with. So that was a definite issue. And there's the typical challenges that you have as a child. And I would say one of the biggest issues is getting through that as a child. Because you're not around your parents all the time, and there's times where you have to figure it out, on your own. And that's part of the difficulties that I think of what we're trying to accomplish here, is that a lot of kids don't have to go through this situation in the future. I remember times where I would be, playing against another team and I was the only Black kid, on my team for the most part. Growing up, I was the only Black kid, and there are challenges. Now it's gotten much better, now, but I still think we're working through all this. But the perfect example for me is I can remember, playing in a game and, at halftime, after I had scored a couple of goals, early on, I remember, and, at this time, the teams are right next to each other. I remember hearing some of the other parents going, why is he playing this sport? They have all the other sports already. What's he doing here? So those comments, as a kid, you're like, what's he talking about? Fortunately for me, my mom, very strong, my grandmother, very strong influences in my life. And it was always about, don't worry about what those people have to say. You do your part, do your thing, and develop yourself. So just to go back to your question, yes, there were a lot of issues, a lot of things that kind of you deal with as a kid. And, that's just the example of a young age. It continues all the way through, to adult, even until this day.
Mm-hmm. Sure. And Ronnie, what was your experience like? Because you were playing all various sports as well and ended up out here on the West Coast. But what were your challenges about moving around and playing the sports that you did growing up as a kid?
Yeah, it's interesting as I was listening to Miss Robinson speak and hearing her talk about where she was at 13 years old. We lived in Washington, D.C., and my parents took us out to the march, and I was a young toddler at that time. And looking back at that moment of smelling the people and being in that environment and knowing that here you are, especially at that time as a kid, not knowing, but trying to understand, the volume of people and understand what it was all about. Clearly at that time, you knew that you were in a situation where people were standing up for something bigger than all of us. And what's fascinating to me is that when I think of that day and being around that environment, I think of what I'm seeing today. And what I see today is the volume of people, and the volume of people saying, this isn't right. And what is fascinating to me is that it tells you that it's not fair. It still isn't fair. And so when I think about that experience in 63 and being in that environment, and then growing up and then trying to, fit in, because I've always felt like life is trying to fit into certain situations. And then hearing about Jackie trying to fit in the service, which my dad was in the Air Force, and knowing that he fought to say that, look, wait a minute, I'm trying to fit in. And he decided to go in a direction, and yet he didn't fit in and he still won. And so there are things that you still learn about how we need to fit in and have justice the right way. And my dad over the years taught us about justice and having it the right way. And when I think of sports and I think of the huddle and I think of relationships, I've always tried to look at that huddle and realize that, hey, I want to fit in. But there were times, like Kobe mentioned, that there was always that moment where you didn't expect that moment to happen. And when we moved to California, and I remember a coach asking me, early on in my life, he said, hey, can you play with white kids? And I was like, what? I can play with anybody. And it didn't dawn on me, that mattered, because as a kid in DC, I never was asked that question. We never talked about it. Now here I'm in California in a small community in Rialto, and someone asked that question. And so you look back, and I still, at this moment, you get emotional around it because you're still trying to understand, what was he thinking? I mean, all I wanted to do was play. I just wanted to play. And so what was he thinking? And what was he trying to convey to me? And so one of the things that you got to listen to people, you got to listen to people. And sometimes as you listen to people, they'll tell you and you'll hear some of the things that they're trying to share with you about what they want and what they're trying to, get out of life. And I think one of the great things about today, for me, is to listen and to understand about the values of all of us and what we've gone through, and more importantly, what we can share to be able to help all the younger people that are out there that hopefully they won't have those experiences, and they get to stand on our shoulders and they get to see that, hey, what he just said matters to me. And by the way, that could be something that could possibly change my life.
The self-confidence we try to develop in kids is that it's okay to be, we're all different in some way. What you experienced, many years after I did, was a part of my life back then. So what do we learn? What do you learn from people that have been through it? And one of the things you learn is, that we do get through it, and we get stronger, as you said, a little bit stronger. But we must remain in this battle for justice and equality in this country and in the world.
And Taylor, what is the obligation of the media and how they portray what's going on, not only back then, but now and moving forward? Where do you see that part of the role of the media in this aspect?
Well, the media always reflect the major culture pretty strongly. It's broader now than it once was, but it always has a skewed view of reality with regard to black and white and race. I lived for a year with Bill Russell writing his memoir, and he said that he was told that if there's a fight in this game and he's involved, it's a riot, whereas if the white kids fight, it's a scuffle. And so everything had its own definition that was driven by race. And from the very beginning of his career, he said any black athlete has to make special choices and more informed choices about how to move forward in the world. He was actually a high jumper with Johnny Mathis, hoping to have a career as a high jumper, but the AAU was so unfair to athletes that Johnny Mathis went off and recorded Chances Are, and Russell went into basketball. And he went to Boston, and he said everybody assumed that Boston was not a racist town because it wasn't in the segregated South, but he said it was horribly racist. And he had to make an adjustment there. His adjustment was, I play for the Celtics, not for Boston. I play for my teammates. And within the sport, he had to make special, he had to be especially thoughtful as a black player in what was still an overwhelmingly white league, to figure out a philosophy that would help him to succeed. And he became he convinced me, he said, there's no such thing as a dumb athlete in high-level sports like this. You've got to be smart to compete. And he became like a philosopher who said, every sport is some mixture of art and war. There's art in Muhammad Ali, even in a brutal sport, and those cute little Tinkerbell female gymnasts will cut your heart out to win. And everybody has to have that. And he developed his philosophy about what basketball was that really involved almost dancing, his theory of defense. And that made him a gifted player and an iconic player. So he was adjusting from the very beginning within his world. But outside his world, he was still controversial when he supported Muhammad Ali refusing induction, or when he went down to Mississippi during Freedom Summer. He said, that was one time when I didn't want to be 6'10". I wanted to be a lot shorter because I was a big target down there. So I guess the lesson from Bill Russell for me is that every black athlete back then and still now has different choices to make about how to fit in a world that's trying to be fair within the lines, but is not fair outside the lines. And how do you navigate those two worlds?
I'm going to go to you, Ronnie. And so from your perspective in moving forward in the NFL, how do you look, where did the NFL succeed in bringing people together, and then where did the NFL maybe fail a little bit? Now we'll get into the Rooney Rule and all that, but as far as your teammates, the locker room, because I've always said, and I know a lot of people have said they wish society was more like the locker room.
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me is that what Taylor just pointed out, how you have to be able to dance, and how you have to be able to fit, and how you have to be able to think, and how you have to be able to find your way around life and surviving. And clearly, one of the great things that when you talk to Jim Brown, or you talk to any of the guys that, you know, played and had to go through what they went through, the art of how you have to be able to do what they were able to do was really, you know, complicated. And now then you fast forward and then you have a guy like Bill Walsh, and you have Bill who is sitting there saying, hey, look, not only do I have Black assistants, but I'm going to find a way to create an environment where I'm going to empower my coaches, and I'm going to try to give them a chance to make sure that they have an opportunity to possibly be head coaches. And so he took that upon himself to say, look, I think that I have the opportunity to create an environment where I can educate people and let them see that, you know what, I got some talented coaches here. And by the way, guys like Ray Rhodes that went on to be a head coach and do a phenomenal job as a head coach, guys like Denny Green that went on to do an incredible job as a head coach. And so all those guys were involved with our team. But then all of a sudden, Bill said, wait a minute, I'm going to bring Harry Edwards in. And I'm going to bring Harry Edwards in. And the reason I want him to be involved with our organization is because I believe guys like Jerry Rice, other guys that I think that are talented people, but I'm going to find a way to make sure that they're integrated in terms of understanding how to play and deal with all the dancing and deal with all the issues that are really complex around San Francisco because of all the different varieties of people in San Francisco. So he brought in Harry Edwards to say, look, you know what? I'm going to make sure that you guys see that I can socially make sure that people can fit in all aspects of life. So for me, I'm thankful for Bill Walsh, and I'm thankful because he decided to do something that other people wouldn't do, and that is to bring in Harry Edwards to provide us a perspective of saying, you know something, there's something bigger than all of us. And by the way, this guy is going to teach us those elements. So clearly, for me, being around Harry and understanding all the things that he brought to the table in terms of social justice was phenomenal, and phenomenal for not only where I sit today in my life, but phenomenal for where a lot of athletes were able to learn from him from the San Francisco 49ers. And he still is involved with that organization and finding a way to bring his knowledge and his experiences that he's dealt with in social justice.
Absolutely. And Kobe, what would you talk to like the kids today in regards to playing on the team, playing at the highest level or trying to make it the highest level, but how do you fit in and with your teammates? How do you get that to come across where you still are an individual, but you still have to play as a team when you're on the field?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of what everyone has just said. It's you know, having a little bit of a dance and adjusting, finding a way to fit in at least. And when we talk about fit in, at least with your group, so that you guys can perform, you know, as a unit when needed, because it's their own family. That's what you have when you're on the team, and the family needs to be connected as much as possible. So you make sacrifices for yourself a little bit for the moment at the time of the team. But then you also have to figure out who you are outside of that team, and you make the necessary statements that you want to and communicate what you want to and be your own person, that you can let everyone else know this is where I stand. But yes, I do kind of make sure that I have to fit in with this team so that we can succeed and have this continued platform, and it is, as Taylor said, learning a dance, and kind of to balance all that out. And I would tell every young player, coming up, that you will have to do all of that. There is no way that you are not going to have to make adjustments and there's no way that you're going to get through everything in life, and in sports smoothly. And you have to be able to try to figure it out, as much as possible, and know that there will be some challenging times. We all see it today. As Ronnie said, Bill Walsh took some steps to really help, I think, football push forward. I think soccer, it's a fledgling sport in the United States, very young compared to other sports. I think we're still behind. We're still looking for that coach to take those steps to help, players kind of make that transition and bringing other people in and moving people where that they can be in positions to help, to help the sport and, and help the local community and just have that social awareness in their communities.
Absolutely. And that's, and Taylor, going back to that, the what's now being called the Russell Rule. What's your take on that, the Russell Rule?
Well, I think it's a fitting tribute to him because he kept far beyond being a player or into his later years. He kept trying to navigate the next gate and to push it open. Remember, he was the player coach for the last two Celtics champions. He's coaching while he's on the floor. Red Auerbach retired and engineered that job for him. He was kind of like Bill Walsh for baseball. And then he stayed on. And when I went out to see him, to work with him on his book in Seattle, he was the coach and general manager of the Seattle Supersonics. And he pushed that job. He told him, I don't think I can coach these people or run these modern athletes. And you're going to pay me a lot more than it's worth, but I'm going to take this job if you'll pay me because I want to open up doors for talent in the managerial positions in the NBA. So that's what he was doing. So he kept doing that. He always felt that was really crucial and that most of the unfairness in sports was outside the lines. You asked me earlier about media, and it just reminded me, I spent a few weeks with Eddie Murray back when he was about to become the first $3 million player, which seems like a long time ago. And they asked me to do a profile of him because he refused to talk to the media. And I rode around with him. We had a great time. And the reason was, he said, every reporter assumes that I'm a natural athlete, that I don't think that Cal Ripken is the leader of this team. He has a great work ethic, but Cal Ripken doesn't communicate with the other players on the team. They come to me. The media can't see that. And they consistently misinterpret everything by assuming that the black player is getting along on natural ability and not the first thing that Eddie Murray said you have to have. You've got to have a superior ability to adapt and figure out what's important. And so I think Eddie Murray and Bill Russell are both great models in that trying to extend the achievements on the field and on the court out into the larger world of sports in the world beyond the athlete's career.
Hey, could I jump in for a sec? That is what Jackie did. That's what Jackie did. Jackie did that in a way where he did it in a style. It's funny because I remember I was at a signing, and I remember meeting a couple of his teammates, and I was sitting there, it's Duke Snider, and I was like, wow. And so you would hear the stories. And I want people to understand that it's also the wisdom of socializing and understanding how to fit. John Lewis, who just passed away, he was committed, but he also knew that he had to fit in. He knew that there were things that he had to accomplish that was bigger than him. And he fought and he fought and he fought. And my point is that you do all of what you're supposed to do because you know that it's the right thing to do. And one of the great things that I love about Jackie is that he had to stand, and sometimes he would sit. Sometimes he'd have to come in the back door. And we forget, because as I walk in the front door, and when I used to walk in the front door, and all of a sudden Jim would say, hey, man, you didn't know I had to come in the back door. And you think about that. Think about that. They had to walk in the back door to get in. And my point is, when you walked in the back door to get in, you still felt like you had to fit in with your teammates, and you had to make sure that hey, you know, I'm cool. I can handle this, and I'm gonna still play with you. I'm still gonna get it done. It tells you that there's some genius around how to make it all work. Mm-hmm. And to me, that aspect of not only greatness on the field, but the greatness of how you interact and make people know that you still got their back is really hard. It's really complicated. And sometimes I think we don't even see that part of these great athletes and what they were able to accomplish in managing those situations.
You know, I think we're talking about, you know, teamwork, really, you know, whether you're on a sports team or you're in a classroom setting in a school. But the way that individuals, because we're also supporting individualism here, the way that individuals work together is really the definition of teamwork. It's working towards a common goal. You know, so whether it's you're winning that game that day, or you know, doing well in your math exams, or how you come together around issues in the classroom that where, you know, kids realize the tension, racial tension, whether it's competing around, you know, who's the smartest or whatever it is. You know, your common goal has got to be, I'm saying the role of leadership is to help or remind you of what the common goal here is why you're working together, you know, is for that common goal. You know, and with my dad, you know, I remember the last time we were together as a family, and that was in the 1972 World Series in Cincinnati. And, you know, back then, baseball was now integrated across the field, but there was nobody in management. It wasn't even an option for my father when he was retiring after, you know, all of his years. So my father had been pushing with the commissioner to move players beyond the playing field into management. And that's, you know, a struggle we continue to have today. So even if there is a Russell rule or a whatever rule, you know, if you don't have committed leadership that says, you know, not only do we want you interviewed, I want to see people of color moved into higher levels, you know, so somebody has to push beyond just, yes, we interviewed, you know, 10 minority candidates or 10 people of color, but we still selected the person we feel was the best for the job. So, you know, when my father fought hardest for, when we talk about fighting, he fought hardest for respect, because, you know, he felt that, you know, I don't care whether you like me, I care that you respect me. And I think that's what we continue to fight for today. And that's why it is how to be respected for who we are and given that opportunity to advance based on our talent.
Yeah, sure. And Kobe, how did, from your perspective, playing in the world sport of soccer, who leads that charge? How does that happen and that change maybe in that world? Where does it go from there?
We can have the Rooney Rule, we can have the Russell Rule, and as Sharon said, it's very easy to say, well, we interviewed someone. Well, did you actually, you know, take, I'll say, the chance on somebody and give them that opportunity to step forward? And that's what's needed. We need some of that leadership to actually move ahead. And, do the hiring. That's a big issue, because we do not have within the soccer world, especially here within the United States, a lot of black coaches. It's something that's very rare. We have a lot of black players. We see a lot of black players on the field, but once you start moving up into the offices and the front office, that's where everything starts to dwindle away. And I think that's a lot of the issue. So the steps that need to be taken, is that I do give credit, to the Rooney Rules and the Russell Rules and stuff like that, because it actually puts those people in front and foremost of everybody else, where people are going to start to think about it. And especially in this day and time, at this age, people are starting to say, okay, well, you said it, and I'm sure everyone here will agree. We've heard this term, oh, we can do better. Well, let's start doing better. Let's start hiring, some of the people that are in front of you and putting them into positions, where they can actually be decision makers. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I'd like to see within the soccer world, because we need more coaches, we need more management, we need more ownership.
Yeah, and Sharon, from your family's legacy, what would you think your dad would kind of, say regarding right now where we are, with all this stuff and how this is kind of playing out right now in this in today's sports society?
Well, I think he would be encouraged by the activism of today's athlete. We have a Derek Jeter owner down with the Marlins. We have baseball players who have formed their own association to deal around race. We have players who are not now speaking up, but I don't think it was necessarily a slow process from Kaepernick to where we are today. It was very dramatic because we all witnessed a man's life being taken in front of us as a result of police brutality. And that was a moment when people just said, oh no, I cannot take this anymore. Many of us were feeling that already. But for the world, it just made it a dramatic moment. So now everybody has to look at leadership and moving people up beyond the playing field, with women, with people of color, people of different sexuality. We can no longer, deny that justice is something that is due to all people.
That's one great thing about sports. It will show you who the best team is. The whole world was shocked when 5 black players from Texas, El Paso beat an all-white Kentucky team in 1966. Right. And nobody thought it was possible, but it happened between the lines, and everybody who hated that had to come to terms with it, except Adolph Rupp, who turned around and banned the dunk shot because he didn't like black players dunking. He banned the dunk shot. People don't remember that. For 8 years, you couldn't dunk. So the subjective things are harder to change. The great virtue of sports is that because it is designed to be fair within the lines, you're not going to have a University of Texas national championship football team in 1969 with 92 players on the roster and not one single black player. If somebody tried to say in Texas now, we want to have an all-white team again, the fans would run them out of town because they wouldn't be competitive between the lines. But anywhere where it's subjective, like who's going to be a coach, and you can't make them run a 100-yard dash or anything to see, that's where prejudice is going to be harder to root out. And it's going to take more witness. It's going to take more people like Colin Kaepernick, because he's protesting things outside the line. And there you can see the sacrifice that he made looked like it was going to be for nothing. And yet, the world is slowly moving in his direction. But these subjective things are harder than the world of sports, which gives you those transforming moments when an all-black team or black players do things that cannot be denied, even by racial hostility.
Sure, and that's a perfect lead into one of the questions, sports does seem to be at a crossroads right now, and sports has the power to unite. That's the goal of the Rose Bowl Institute, and to bring people together. And I think it's kind of fitting that we are in challenging times with a pandemic, but the sports are trying to get going because athletes want to play. But I also think it brings some comfort in some ways, and I think we forget how much sports is ingrained in us until it's not there. How does, and Kobe, I'll start with you, sports and uniting people are not only here in America, but around the globe. How can sports help us unite during this challenging time?
Well, I think the fact that sports is starting to be played again is the first step, and the sacrifices that players are willing to make to go out there and actually participate during a pandemic, shows you their passion, for their sport, their love for the sport, but also what they're giving back, to the general public to go out there and perform. I think it's fantastic, what we're doing, and I think everyone in the world kind of realized how, as you mentioned, Brian, how ingrained sports is, because you start realizing there's not a lot to talk about with some people, if you don't have sports, so I think with it slowly coming back, all of a sudden you're starting to see people communicating and talking, and it brings people together on that common ground, and that's extremely important, because if you can start a conversation and have a commonality with it, it can lead into a variety of other things and a lot of other topics. And then it can go into the issues that are surrounded by sport, but it gets people talking. That's the most important. You have to start somewhere. And if you have this separation and this continued separation, you're going to see that stratification that we were talking about earlier, where a stratification of ideas. And that's not what we want within this country. We want people to be coming together, and sports, it's that unifier that can get everyone talking once again.
Yeah, I think, to echo what Kobe said, it's so true, but I also want to not lose sight of the idea of competing. Because when people are struggling and persevering and working towards a goal and trying to find, outcomes that make it better for all. I mean, we just talked about the outcome of ownership, of ownership, of having leaders and Black leaders have ownership, and so I think that you got to compete to understand that you can still, break down those barriers. I mean, to me, the great thing that I loved about Jackie was how well he competed, and how well he competed in every aspect. He didn't just compete on the field, but he competed in every aspect. So he didn't go down to just sit there and say that I'm not going to compete. I'm going to participate because I know that I matter, and I want to make sure that people know that I'm competing to open up doors, to open up opportunities so people can vote. So let's don't lose sight of our spirit of competition and our spirit of being able to compete and find ways to open up opportunities for others, because I want somebody to stand on my shoulders.
I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned as far as equity is concerned, that's hopeful in part and intersects with the world outside of sports, is the great revolution that's taken place in my lifetime in women's sports, which really didn't exist when I was growing up. When I was growing up, the girls couldn't even dribble across half court in basketball. They were afraid they wouldn't be able to have babies. All cheerleaders. That was basically all they did. And because of Title IX and because of Billie Jean King and other pioneers like that, women's sports, women's soccer, that women's World Cup team is about as inspiring as you can get. And it's helping the other half, the larger half of humanity, get involved in all of these other issues like the Russell Rule, because they're involved in sports too. And I think that's an encouraging part of the daunting task of extending the justice that Ronnie and Kobe and Sharon are talking about.
Yeah, and just for everybody who's tuning in and gets for edification, Billie Jean King is a part of our Rose Bowl Institute Advisory Board, a pioneer, obviously, and also obviously the '99 Women's World Cup team happened at the Rose Bowl with Brandi Chastain and Julie Foudy and Mia Hamm and Brianna Scurry and all those great that great team, and we have a statue dedicated to them outside the gates of the Rose Bowl Stadium. And the Brandi Chastain and Julie Foudy are part of our Rose Bowl Institute Advisory Board. So I'm going to leave the last question for Ms. Robinson. And would your father play sports and compete during this day and age of society, or would he focus on the social issues because he was a pioneer in both? So would he lean towards one or the other, or what do you think he would do at this point?
No, Ronnie, what do you think? No way. He would.
Hey, you know it. You know it. He would be all in.
He'd be all in, and he would find a way, like he did, to do both. No, if you're an athlete, listen. I live in Florida because I was an athlete too, and I still love to swim. So I love to be in Florida because I can swim year round. Yeah. It's in your heart. It's not going anywhere. So no, he would. Right. He would, and he would enjoy it so much more now because you're able to also be a spokesperson, speak up. They were kind of held down back in those days. But yeah, he loved his sports. I tell you, my dad could barely see. He died at 53, but he could barely see. He couldn't even drive himself to work anymore. But he went and played golf every weekend. He would not stop playing golf. So, no. God bless sports. We need it. I'm glad I'm worried for our athletes out there playing today, but you're right. They give us all joy and push us forward and say we can do it too. We can't play football or soccer, but we can. Our spirits can push through challenging times, and we need to see that. I must say, guys, that we have young girls and women playing baseball, and Major League Baseball has been very supportive of through our Trailblazers series. So we, foresee a future when women will be on Major League Baseball teams, and that's something in my lifetime that I didn't really think would happen, but I see it happening now, and I'm really thrilled for the growth of women in sports because again, it teaches us about leadership, teaches us about teamwork, it teaches us about having this kind of fighting spirit we're talking about, and feeling passionate about something and being able to act on it.
We're real excited to see that, and obviously your father means so much to us here at the Rose Bowl here in Pasadena, California. We have a statue out front. For those of you tuning in and want to come visit the Rose Bowl, you can see the Jackie statue with great information on what Jackie meant out here in Pasadena, playing at PCC, playing football, playing at UCLA, three-sport athlete. He is a Rex Bowl. He is a Rose Bowl. And it is.
Sorry, Trojans.
Yeah. Looks like we're out of time. But for those of you tuning in, you can see we have a lot of work to do. But the power of sports has the ability to unite people from all backgrounds and walks of life. That is the goal and the mission for the Rose Bowl Institute for the coming months and years. At this time, we'd like to thank our distinguished panelists, Sharon Robinson, Taylor Branch, Kobe Jones, and Ronnie Lott. On behalf of Rose Bowl Institute President Charlie Firestone, Rose Bowl Stadium CEO Daryl Dunn, we'd like to thank all of you for tuning in today. Please be sure to go to our website, rosebowlinstitute.org, and follow us on all of our social media channels so you can see all of the upcoming events. Thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you all in sunny Pasadena. at America Stadium, the Rose Bowl. Thank you and good night.
This is the next step. The Rose Bowl Institute is our opportunity to bring all the gifts that the Rose Bowl has to a higher level of people and to push the leadership of our country and of the world.
The Rose Bowl is a huge part of the history of football, sports, of entertainment, concerts, events. The Rose Bowl is very, very special.
The Rose Bowl Institute uses the iconic stadium as its classroom, as well as other influential cities around America that have added to its rich heritage.
We feel there's an opportunity to educate the public through the characteristics of those events, the leadership, the teamwork, the equality, and the ethics, and we want to extract those things and talk about them more through the Rose Bowl Institute.
History is not meant to anchor us, it's meant to support us and provide a foundation for growth and expansion and continued exploration and improvement. And I think